They said no one could last a single day, not with 4 wild-hearted children, not under the roof of a woman trained to command armies, not cradle them. But then, a quiet man walked in. No resume, no rank, just a mop, a lunchbox, and something none of them saw coming. Now, let me take you to the day the general met the janitor. The last maid left at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. Running. She didn't walk, didn't mutter an apology. She ran, nearly tripping over her handbag as she fled the grand entryway of the Maddox home, past the towering portraits of military heritage and into the blinding spring sunlight. The front door swung wide, then slowly creaked shut behind her, like a verdict echoing through a courtroom. Inside, silence fell like a gavel. General Marin Maddox, standing at the top of the staircase in full uniform, didn't flinch. Her spine was straight, her jaw square. She had led units into combat zones with less chaos than what unfolded in her own home that day. Her 4 daughters had, once again, executed a flawless takedown of another experienced caregiver. Downstairs, a trail of destruction remained. Chocolate syrup smeared across the grand piano keys, stuffed animals hanging from the antique chandelier like casualties of war, and someone, probably Maisie, had used permanent marker to draw a secret spy map across the hall mirror. And then there was Lily. Quiet, unmoving Lily, seated cross-legged beneath the staircase, clutching her worn grey plush rabbit like a life vest. She hadn't spoken in almost a year. Marin exhaled, just once, just enough to remind herself she was human. "That's 17, said a voice behind her. Colonel Rivera, her former second-in-command, and now her closest civilian advisor, stood leaning against the upstairs banister with a clipboard in hand. He didn't say it with judgment, just fatigue. 17 nannies, housekeepers, or therapists, he clarified, in 8 months. None of them were combat-ready, Marin replied coolly, descending the staircase with the air of someone inspecting a failed perimeter. He chuckled. No one is combat-ready for 4 grieving girls and a grieving mother pretending not to be one of them. Marin shot him a look that could have melted steel, but Rivera didn't back down. "You know I'm right." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked straight through the living room, boots echoing across hardwood floors, and into the kitchen, where the scent of burnt toast still lingered from Luna's breakfast experiment. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, as if mocking her silence. Rivera followed. "There's one more applicant." "No, he's not exactly an applicant," Rivera added. "He's already on base, janitor detail, no degree, no certifications. But I've seen how he interacts with people. He listens. He's calm. Unusually calm." Marin turned sharply. "You want me to let some mop-wielding stranger into my house?" "He's former fire rescue," Rivera said, meeting her eyes. "Lost his wife and daughter in a house fire, came out of it with burns and, more than that, scars you can't see. But there's something about him, something steady. What's his name? Luke Miller. He's not trying to impress anyone. He just shows up, quietly, cleans, leaves. But he sees people, Marin. Really sees them." Marin closed her eyes for a long breath. When she opened them, the kitchen clock had ticked twice more. "Fine," she said. One day, the next morning, Luke Miller arrived at precisely 7 a.m. He didn't ring the bell. He knocked, softly, then stood back, a canvas duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a lunchbox dangling from the other hand. He wore dark jeans, worn boots, and a janitor's uniform that had seen better days. His hair was slightly too long, his beard slightly too scruffy. But his eyes were gentle in a way that made Marin uncomfortable. He said nothing as she opened the door, just offered a small nod and stepped in only when she moved aside. Kitchen. Breakfast is at 7:30. Lily doesn't talk. Maisie bites. Luna runs things she shouldn't. Lark cries when she's ignored and ignores when she's not, Maureen said, in the voice she used to brief soldiers before deployment. Luke listened, nodded once, then set down his bag. Understood. He walked straight into the chaos like someone walking into a fire. Not fast, not afraid. He didn't announce himself to the girls, didn't bark orders, didn't bring toys or rewards or structure. He simply pulled out a sponge and quietly began cleaning the sticky counter, humming something slow and warm under his breath. The girls watched from the hallway, whispering. Lily peeked out from behind the banister. 10 minutes later, Lark walked in and handed him a pink crayon. Luke took it, turned it in his fingers like a treasure, and said, "Thanks." That was it. No one cried. No one screamed. No one ran. By 10 a.m., Luna and Maisie were building a pillow fort in the living room, while Luke swept under the furniture. At noon, Maureen checked the security cameras and stared at the screen in disbelief. Lily was sitting in the same room with him, 3 feet away, drawing quietly. Her plush rabbit lay on the couch beside her. She wasn't clutching it. That night, Maureen returned home late from a military advisory meeting. She opened the door, expecting disaster. But the living room was dim and quiet. In the den, she saw something that made her hand tighten on the doorframe. Luke was lying on the floor, one hand behind his head, breathing slow. Around him, all 4 girls had fallen asleep, on his chest, on his arm, curled at his side. Even Lily. They looked like they hadn't just accepted him. They looked like they trusted him. Maureen stood frozen. The woman who had led over 4,000 soldiers in operations overseas, who had testified before Congress, who had buried a husband and wiped her children's tears without blinking, now couldn't take a single step forward. The mop-wielding janitor had made it farther in one day than 17 trained professionals had in 8 months, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something shift inside her chest. A crack. A warmth. A beginning. Luke didn't speak unless spoken to. By the end of his first full day, the girls had already noticed. He didn't bark orders, didn't praise excessively, and didn't try to entertain them like a clown on a contract. He just moved through the house as if it had always belonged to him, not by possession, but by purpose. That morning, the sun rose soft and slow over the Maddox residence. Golden light spilled through the bay windows of the kitchen like honey, catching on the dust motes suspended midair. Luke had already been up for an hour, silently brewing coffee and reorganizing the spice rack alphabetically, not because anyone told him to, but because the cumin had been next to the cinnamon, and that just didn't sit right. He didn't hum that morning. He listened. He listened to the floorboards creak upstairs, to Luna's groggy shuffle past the landing, to Lark's whisper squeal when she stepped barefoot into a cold patch of tile, to the sound of cereal falling too fast into a metal bowl, to the fridge door closing 3 times in a row. He knew that kind of rhythm. The music of a house learning how to breathe again. Around 7:45, he found Lark, the youngest, sitting cross-legged near the shoe rack, struggling with her tangled ponytail and a glittery pink brush that looked more decorative than functional. Her tiny fingers fumbled and pulled, tears of frustration welling silently in her lashes. Luke crouched nearby, not close, not abrupt, just there. He gently reached into his canvas duffel and pulled out an old cloth ribbon. Pale yellow, frayed at the ends, soft from years of use. He didn't explain it. He didn't ask. He held it out, open-palmed. Lark blinked up at him. There was a long pause, then a shy nod. And in the next minute, Luke tied her hair back, slowly, gently, like he'd done for another little girl once, long ago. She smiled when he finished. not brightly. Just enough. Luke smiled back with his eyes. He moved next to the hallway, dusting baseboards, straightening picture frames. He paused at a black and white photograph of Marin in uniform, standing between two rows of soldiers. Her smile in the photo was faint, pressed, and tight, her posture perfect. But her eyes, they weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at something far away. He didn't linger. It wasn't until mid-morning that he saw Lily. She was seated by the sliding glass door, curled in the same spot she returned to every day. Legs pulled to her chest, rabbit clutched tight in her arms. The glass was smudged from her fingers. Outside, the garden was overgrown, tangled with wild roses, and last year's herbs now gone to seed. Lily didn't acknowledge him. Luke didn't speak. He didn't even walk past her. He just stayed nearby, wiping down the bookshelves one quiet shelf at a time. Lily's eyes flicked toward him once, then again. But she didn't run. She didn't hide. And to anyone else, that may have seemed like nothing. But to Luke, that stillness was sacred. At lunchtime, while the girls bickered over who got the last slice of banana bread, Luke quietly cleared the breakfast dishes. Maisie asked him, "Why don't you ever get mad?" He just smiled. "I used to, but it didn't help the people I love." Maisie paused, chewing on that answer like she did her pencil erasers, then said, "That's weird. I like it." Luke laughed, the first full sound he made all day. Warm, honest, not loud. But it filled the corners of the room like soft light. Later, as the sun began its descent, Luke walked up the stairs with a small bundle of origami paper tucked into his back pocket. The hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't come from absence, but from children finally settled in their own energy. He passed Luna's room. She was writing. He passed Maisie's. She was coloring on her desk lamp again. And then he stood before Lily's door, slightly ajar. No knock. No sound. He sat down just outside, leaning his back against the wall. Then, with slow, practiced hands, he began folding. A crane. The paper crinkled softly, a language older than apology, more delicate than hope. When he finished, he got up, walked silently into her room. She was lying on her side, eyes wide open, watching, and he placed the crane gently on the windowsill, right where the morning light would touch it. He didn't speak, he didn't smile. He just gave a nod and left. That night, long after the girls were tucked in and the dishes washed, Marin came home from her second briefing of the day. Her shoulders were tight, her phone buzzed in her pocket, and her eyes were tired. She opened the door to clean floors, books in neat stacks, quiet laughter echoing from the upstairs hallway. She found Luke sitting in the mudroom, repairing the strap on Lark's backpack with thread and a dull needle. She didn't say hello. She just looked at him and asked, "Why a crane?" Luke didn't look up. They say cranes bring peace where people forget how to ask for it. Marin stood frozen for a second, something catching in her throat. Then she turned and walked to the kitchen, not because she didn't want to answer, but because if she did, she might have cried. And generals didn't cry. Not yet. Marin Maddox lived by the clock. The military taught her that structure saved lives. Seconds mattered. Margins of error were death sentences. So she brought that same structure home. Schedules laminated and posted in every room. Alarms synced across digital tablets. Color-coded weekly goals for each child. And a spreadsheet titled Emotional Status Tracking that no one but she understood. That was the world she built when her husband died. Structure in place of certainty. Rules in place of love. Control where grief had once lived. Which was why, on a Wednesday morning at exactly 9 to 17 a.m., she felt her teeth grind when she walked into the house and saw 1. The breakfast dishes still on the counter. 2. Luna laughing during math hour 3. Luke Miller, her so-called interim domestic assistant, sitting on the floor with a jar of buttons, letting Maisie sort them by color and size, not alphabetically. Marin inhaled through her nose, slow and deep. She set her briefcase down, removed her gloves with military precision, and stepped into the living room like a general entering enemy territory. "Why is no one where they're supposed to be?" she asked. Each word clipped, aimed. Luke looked up slowly, the kind of calm that infuriated people who prided themselves on efficiency. "Learning happens in more places than desks," he said mildly. Marin's brow lifted. "And where's the work log?" she asked, scanning the entry table. "You haven't submitted a single checklist or time summary since Monday." "I don't keep logs," Luke replied simply. Marin crossed her arms. "So I'm just to assume you're fulfilling your duties? Based on nothing?" Luke stood, slow but steady, brushing his hands off on his jeans. He met her eyes, not defiantly, but without flinching. "I clean what can't be seen," he said. That stopped her. What's that supposed to mean? He looked around, the sunlight filtering through messy windows, the hallway covered in crayon-sketched paper, the sound of laughter upstairs. "It means I tend to what people leave behind," he said. "Grief, fear, guilt, silence. No offense, General, but there's a lot more of that around here than dust." The room went still. For a heartbeat, maybe 2. She didn't breathe. Then Luna came bounding down the stairs with a binder in hand. "Mom, I finished my decimals early, so I started—" She stopped. Marin turned, eyes still cool from the exchange with Luke. "Why aren't you in your room doing your assigned work?" Luna hesitated. We were going to do baking fractions, like with measuring cups. That's not part of today's lesson. You're deviating from the schedule again." "I thought you'd be proud," Luna whispered. "I'm disappointed," Marin said flatly. That's when it happened. Luna's face collapsed. The binder dropped from her hands and hit the tile with a sad flap. She looked at her mother as if she'd just been sentenced. Then she turned, ran past the coffee table, and buried herself in the arms of the only adult in the room who didn't make her feel small. Luke. She wrapped both arms around him with the desperation of someone who needed to be heard without words. And Luke, he didn't freeze, didn't panic, didn't scold. He knelt, arms enveloping her like a shield, and simply whispered, "You're okay. I've got you." Marin stood there, rigid, a living statue of discipline, watching her daughter tremble in someone else's embrace. Something cracked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't visible. But it was unmistakable. She left the room, retreated to the kitchen, but her hands were shaking. She turned on the faucet and ran her fingers under the cold stream just to have something to focus on. But her breath came uneven, and her reflection in the microwave door looked like someone she didn't recognize. She'd meant to guide them, protect them, make them resilient. Instead, her daughter cried into the arms of a janitor, and Marin couldn't bring herself to stop it. An hour passed. By then, Luna had returned to her room, and the others had settled into various quiet activities. Luke stood on the porch, coiling the garden hose, when Marin stepped outside. She didn't speak for a long time, just watched him. Hands strong, movements unhurried. Face tilted toward the wind like someone who trusted the weather not to change without warning. "You think I'm doing everything wrong," she finally said. Luke paused, then looked up. "I think you're doing everything alone," he answered. That landed like a punch. Marin felt the tears before she could stop them, but not on her cheeks, in her throat, the way they sat in soldiers too proud to cry, the kind that build, not burst. He turned back to the hose. "I didn't come here to take over," he said. "I came here because your girls deserve to feel safe enough to laugh again. That's all." She didn't reply. But this time she didn't argue. That night, as Luke was folding laundry, he found a small note tucked into the sleeve of Luna's hoodie. It read, "Thanks for not getting mad. You feel like Dad used to." He stared at it for a long time, then folded it and placed it carefully into his wallet, behind an old picture of a little girl with wild hair and eyes full of sky. The call came from the school just after 1:30 p.m. Marin had just finished a classified conference call when her cell buzzed. She answered out of habit more than curiosity, her voice crisp and professional, even when she said, "Yes, this is her mother." But as the words unfolded, incident, verbal altercation, pushed a classmate, and refused to apologize, her face stiffened. Maisie, 7 years old, sweet, explosive, curious, a hurricane in glitter sneakers, and apparently the center of a lunchtime meltdown in the third-grade cafeteria. When Luke arrived to pick her up, he found Maisie sitting cross-legged on the front steps of the school, arms crossed, expression locked in a scowl that could slice through glass. Her backpack lay at her side, the zipper halfway undone, her lunchbox sticking out like a forgotten secret. She didn't look up when he approached, didn't speak. Luke sat down beside her, silent. A full minute passed. Then she huffed. "I'm not sorry," he nodded. "He said Dad must have left 'cause we're bad kids," she growled. Luke didn't speak. Maisie turned to look at him. "That's not true, right?" Luke's voice was low and even. "No, it's not." Maisie blinked fast, fighting tears, then turned away. "I pushed him. I know that's bad. But I wanted to scream, and nothing came out." Luke looked down at her small hands, clenched into fists. Then he did what she didn't expect. He reached for her backpack, unzipped it, and handed her a crumpled piece of notebook paper and a pen. "Draw it," he said gently. Maisie looked at him like he was speaking Martian. "Whatever you wanted to scream. Draw it." She stared. Then, hesitantly, took the pen. Luke didn't watch her draw. He just waited. Back at the house, Marin stood in the kitchen, hands on her hips, the phone still warm from the principal's call. She turned as Luke and Maisie entered. Maisie still quiet, eyes dry but unreadable. "I was told she shoved another student," Marin said, voice level but tight. Luke raised a hand. "I'll handle it." Marin's brow lifted. "Handle it?" He looked her in the eye. "With your permission." There was a long pause. Then, to her own surprise, she nodded once and stepped aside. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the kitchen 20 minutes later. Luke didn't lecture, didn't question. He baked. Maisie sat on the counter, swinging her legs, arms folded. She watched him move, measuring flour with exactness, cracking eggs one-handed, stirring with slow precision. No rush. No noise. "Why are you making muffins?" she asked. "I always made these when Molly had a bad day." Maisie turned. "Who's Molly?" Luke paused. "My daughter." Maisie's eyes grew wide. "You had a daughter." "I still do," he said. "Just not the way I used to." Maisie went quiet. Then, with small voice, "Did she die?" Luke nodded once. Maisie looked down at the batter. "Do you still get sad?" He didn't answer right away. Then, with a soft smile, "Every day. But each day, a little less." Maisie didn't speak again, but she reached out and placed one of her small hands on top of his, just for a moment. Just long enough, that night, as the house settled into its usual rhythm. Luna reading, Lark humming as she arranged plastic dinosaurs by size. Luke sat on the living room floor with Maisie curled beside him, head on his shoulder, half asleep from sugar and the comfort of a full stomach. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Luke reached for a worn songbook from his bag, opened it to a marked page, and began to hum. It was a lullaby. Old, soothing, unpolished. Sleep, my wild one. Stars will keep guarding dreams too soft to speak. The melody drifted like smoke, filling the corners of the room, curling around the wooden beams above. It was a song sung with memory more than voice, half in the throat, half in the heart. Across the hall, by the foot of the staircase, Lily sat on the floor, her rabbit cradled in her arms. She didn't move. But her eyes, those wide, solemn, silent eyes, lifted toward Luke. And then it happened. Her lips curved, just barely. It wasn't a grin, not even a full smile, just the soft upturn of something fragile, something new, something almost forgotten. Luke didn't see it, but Maureen, standing quietly by the den doorway, did. She watched her daughter, the one who hadn't smiled since the funeral, smile. No sound, no fanfare, just that one pure moment, and it shattered something inside her. Maureen leaned against the doorframe, hand to her mouth, her breath catching on something so tender it frightened her. Later, after the girls were asleep, Maureen passed Luke in the hallway. He was folding a blanket at the edge of the couch. She smiled, she said quietly. Luke looked up. Lily, she added. She smiled. He nodded. I know. How? She asked. He shrugged gently. You don't teach that. You wait for it. Maureen stood there for a long time, then said, Thank you, for not fixing her. Luke tilted his head. She's not broken, he said. Just waiting for someone to stop trying so hard to put her back together. Maureen exhaled slowly, eyes softening. I don't know how to stop trying. You don't have to, Luke said. Just sit beside her once in a while. That night, Maureen stood at the threshold of Lily's room, watching her sleep, the faint curve of a smile still resting on her lips. And for the first time in a long, long time, Maureen smiled too. It began with a sheet of paper, creased, a little wrinkled, corners bent like it had been held too tightly, too long. Lily stood by the kitchen table, silent as always, her rabbit tucked under one arm, the paper clutched in the other. Maureen had just set down her laptop, still half in command mode from an early morning strategy call. She looked up, expecting a request, a need, maybe a question. But Lily didn't speak. She simply reached out and placed the drawing in front of her mother. Maureen's hand hovered in the air for a beat, too long before she picked it up. The paper trembled slightly in her fingers, not from Lily's hands, but from her own. It was a drawing in crayon, full of looping colors and bold, childlike shapes. The setting was beneath a large tree, its branches wide and curled like arms stretching outward. Under the tree were 5 figures, 4 girls and 1 adult. All the girls were smiling. The smallest held a rabbit, and the adult, tall, brown-haired, bearded, was Luke. He wasn't standing in the background like a stranger. He was in the center, holding Lily's hand. There was no title, no words, just colors, and a quietness so alive it hummed. Maureen's throat tightened. She looked up to find Lily already gone, back down the hall, her bare feet whispering against the hardwood. Not a word spoken, not a glance exchanged. Just the picture. That evening, Maureen couldn't bring herself to mention the drawing. Not during dinner, where Luke served potato soup, and Lark insisted she'd seen a raccoon in the mailbox. Not during bedtime, when Luna asked for extra nightlight time, and Maisie made shadow puppets on the wall. She kept the drawing beside her on the counter, like a document waiting for classification. But it wasn't meant to be filed. It was meant to be felt. And Maureen didn't yet know how to do that. Later that night, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that came not from exhaustion, but from something gentler. Peace settling in for the night. Maureen passed Lily's room and paused. Her hand hovered near the doorknob, but she didn't open it. Instead, she stepped back. her gaze drawn toward the open crack in the den door. Luke sat in the armchair by the fire, a worn children's book in his lap. His voice was soft, low and warm, like river water over stones. And when the wind spoke, the tree didn't tremble. It listened, because some trees know how to wait, even through storms. Marin leaned slightly against the wall just outside the room, arms folded, but not in defensiveness this time. She was simply listening. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't see, was that down the hallway, in the dim light of her bedroom, Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, her rabbit nestled beside her. Her lips moved. No sound came. But they moved, in sync with Luke's voice. Word for word, she mouthed the lines as he read them, a whisper of breath dancing over her tongue like a song she'd known forever, but had never dared to sing aloud. No one told her to repeat. No therapist coached her. No reward was offered. It was just happening. The words were choosing to return to her, gently, without pressure, because someone had finally spoken to her heart instead of her silence. Marin's breath caught. She didn't know why. She didn't know how she knew something was happening behind her. But in that moment, something inside her softened. Not a collapse, not a surrender, but a small breaking of ground, long frozen. A tear rose. Just one. It slipped quietly down her cheek and landed without sound on the sleeve of her blouse. She reached up, startled almost to touch the wetness. It had been so long. Not since the funeral. Not since the casket lowered into the ground and Lily stopped speaking. Not since she chose to wear armor even in her own home. And now, a tear. Not from grief, but from something she couldn't name yet. Hope. No, not yet. But maybe. The beginning of it. After the story, Luke quietly closed the book. The fire had dimmed to soft embers. He stood, stretched slightly, and walked toward the kitchen, unaware of the pair of eyes watching him through the hallway shadows. Marin stepped back just in time. She didn't want him to see her like that, not with red eyes and a crumpled drawing pressed against her chest. That night, before she went to bed, she placed Lily's drawing on her nightstand. She smoothed its edges with gentle fingers, then reached over and turned off the lamp. In the darkness, she lay awake longer than usual, and for the first time in many, many months, she didn't feel alone. The letter had been tucked inside the smallest pocket of Luke's old canvas duffel bag. He wasn't looking for it that evening. He'd meant only to retrieve his sewing kit. Maisie's sock monkey had lost a button eye again, but his fingers brushed against something folded, delicate and familiar. His breath caught as he pulled it free. The paper had yellowed at the corners. The handwriting on the envelope was soft, slanted, unmistakable. To Luke. Read it when you're ready. It had been 3 years. Luke sat very still on the edge of his bed, holding the envelope between his palms like something sacred. For a long time he didn't move. Then, as if the moment asked for something softer than walls, he rose, tucked the letter into his shirt pocket, and stepped out into the cool night. The porch light glowed warm and amber against the shadows of the late hour. The wind whispered gently through the trees, rustling the leaves like soft memory. Luke sat down on the wooden bench under the eaves. His hands were steady, but his chest was not. He unfolded the letter like one might handle an old photograph, afraid of both what it would show and what it might awaken. He began to read. "My love, I know you'll find this too late. That's okay. Some things take time to face, even when love never left the room. If you're reading this, it means you've survived what I didn't. And I'm glad. You always had more strength than you believed. I don't want you to carry me forever. I want you to carry your gentleness, your way of noticing when someone needs a moment of silence more than words, your patience, your heart. If you ever meet someone who's lost their way, like you once did, don't run from it. Don't pull away. If they need a place to rest, be that place. Don't be afraid to stay. Love always, Molly. His eyes burned, but the tears didn't fall. They stayed where they always had, somewhere behind the heart, aching, faithful. He folded the letter slowly and slipped it back into his pocket. That's when he heard the door. Marin stepped onto the porch, wearing a light cardigan and no shoes. Her hair was down, unusual for her, cascading in soft waves that caught the porch light. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with the kind of quiet curiosity that asked nothing, but understood everything. Luke shifted slightly but didn't stand. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said softly. "You didn't." Another pause. The wind filled the space between them. She looked at the letter in his hand, but didn't ask. He didn't hide it. After a moment he said, "It was from my wife, Molly. She wrote it before she—" He stopped, swallowed. "I never read it until tonight." Marin sat down beside him, not close, not too far, just within arm's reach. Still, she didn't press. Luke leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, the letter now folded tightly between his fingers. "She knew me better than I knew myself," he said. "She knew I'd freeze, that I'd get lost in the routines, and fixing things, instead of feeling them." He exhaled. "She told me not to run if I found someone who needed somewhere to land." He glanced sideways, just once. But it's hard to know when to stay, especially when it's not your life, not your family. Marin was quiet. The porch creaked gently beneath them. Then, for the first time, she reached out and laid her hand softly on his shoulder. Not firm, not directive. Just there. It was the touch of someone who had spent years touching with command, now daring to touch with compassion. "I think," she said slowly, "that we're all just hoping someone chooses to stay, even when it's not required." Luke didn't move, but something inside him softened, not in surrender, but in shared recognition. They sat there for a long while, two people wrapped in silence, but not loneliness. The breeze cooled. A moth danced in the porch light. From inside, the soft creak of a bed frame and Lark's little sleep mumble floated through the night. Marin drew her knees up and hugged them lightly. "Do you miss her every day?" He nodded. "Yes." "And does it hurt?" Luke's eyes remained on the dark stretch of yard beyond the porch. "Less, but deeper." Marin closed her eyes. "I still sleep on my side of the bed," she whispered. "I never stopped." Luke didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because between them, on that porch, in the stillness of the evening, grief wasn't a wound anymore. It was a garden, overgrown, wild, but alive. Later, as she stood to return inside, Marin paused at the door. "I'm not good at this," she said, glancing back at him. "Letting people stay." Luke offered a soft smile. "Neither was I." Then, just before she stepped in, she turned, looked him full in the face, and said the most human thing she'd said to anyone in months. "Thank you for not walking away." Luke nodded once, and stayed exactly where he was. The garden had become the children's favorite place. It wasn't manicured or fenced, or even properly weeded. Wild mint ran along the base of the crumbling shed. Dandelions popped through cracks in the flagstone. The tree with the wide arms, the one from Lily's drawing, stood off-center in the backyard like a patient sentinel, watching over all of it. It was Luke's idea to let them play out there without schedule or assignment. No structure, no rule book, just sun, just dirt, just the slow healing of being allowed to be. That afternoon, Luke sat on the porch steps with a mug of lukewarm coffee in hand, watching them. He didn't interrupt. He didn't hover. He simply observed, like a man tending a flame, not daring to blow too hard. Luna had created a magic potion from crushed marigold petals and rainwater. Maisie was making mud cookies with intense focus. Lark was building a kingdom out of flat stones, complete with a dragon cave and a pine cone queen. And Lily was sitting just outside the circle, her hands digging gently into the soil. She wasn't quite part of the game, but she wasn't apart from it either. She watched everything, absorbed every sound. Her eyes flicked from sister to sister, then occasionally to Luke. No one expected anything. No one demanded. And perhaps that was why it happened. Luke shifted his weight, adjusting his foot on the step. A bird chirped, the wind moved, and then, Luke. One word, small, quiet, almost unsure of itself, but real. The world stopped. Luna dropped her flower bowl. Maisie froze mid-stir. Lark gasped, open-mouthed. Even the breeze paused. Luke blinked once, then slowly turned his head toward her. She was staring at him, rabbit in one hand, dirt on her knees, her face unreadable except for the slightest tremor in her lip. He didn't speak, he didn't smile, he just opened his arms. That was all. And Lily, so small, so silent, so still for so long, got up and ran. The kind of run that children do when they're running towards something they trust. Her arms flung around his neck, her cheek pressed to his shirt. She didn't cry. She didn't say anything else. She just held on. Luke wrapped his arms around her carefully, tenderly, the way one might cradle something priceless, because that's what she was. He closed his eyes and let the moment sink in like roots into soil. From the second-story window above, Maren watched everything. She had been upstairs sorting reports on military family reintegration policy, eyes scanning data she used to care about. But something, some invisible pull, had made her glance outside. And what she saw made her stop breathing. Her daughter, her Lily, speaking, running, clinging, not to her, but to Luke. Her legs went weak. She sat down heavily on the edge of her bed, one hand braced on the nightstand, the other over her chest like she was trying to hold her ribs together. She wanted to be angry, wanted to feel something familiar, like jealousy or shame or even fear. But what filled her instead was something worse, and also more honest. Gratitude and pain. The pain of knowing she had tried everything, books, specialists, structure, and none of it had brought Lily back. But he did. The man with no rank, no clipboard, no credentials, just a heart wide enough to wait. Maren came downstairs 30 minutes later. The girls were still outside, now gathered under the tree with sidewalk chalk and wild laughter. She could hear Maisie declaring war on the ants. Luna was inventing rules to a new game that changed every 2 minutes. And Lily was singing. Not full songs, just bits, humming, fragments of nursery rhymes. But it was sound, and it was hers. And it was beautiful. She found Luke sitting on the porch, sanding a loose splinter on the railing with a small file. He looked up as she approached. Maren didn't sit. Not yet. She stood there, arms at her side, eyes on him. "She said your name," she whispered. Luke nodded. "I haven't heard her voice in almost a year." "I know. She ran to you." "Yes. She hugged you like she's known you all her life." Luke looked away briefly, then back to her. "She just needed time." Maren's throat tightened. "But I'm her mother." Luke's voice was gentle. "And you are. Always. But sometimes, healing doesn't come from the one who's closest. Sometimes it finds its way in through the quiet spaces no one else is looking at." Maren sat beside him. She didn't cry. Not this time. But she did reach over, unthinking, and touch his hand, just for a second. Then she looked out toward the yard and whispered, almost to herself, "I think I forgot how to be quiet." Luke didn't respond. He just stayed with her, in the quiet, exactly as he had stayed with Lily. That night, Lily placed her rabbit on her pillow and lay down with a soft sigh. She didn't ask for a story, but she reached for Luke's hand as he tucked her blanket. Maren stood at the door, watching, and for once, she didn't feel replaced. She felt rescued, not by a man with a uniform, but by a man with a presence, one that asked for nothing and gave everything. It happened on a Monday, the kind of Monday that begins too early and carries the weight of things unsaid. Maren stood in the hallway outside the kitchen, her arms tightly folded, watching Luke through the open archway. He was tying Maisie's shoelaces with the same quiet care he always used, humming something soft under his breath, probably one of the old lullabies the kids had picked up from him. Lily sat next to him, brushing dust off her stuffed rabbit. She was smiling faintly. She had spoken again that morning. "More toast, please." Just like that, as if silence had never haunted her. But Maren's chest was tight, not with joy, with fear. Something in her had begun to tremble days ago. It was the realization that her children were becoming themselves again, not because of her, but because of him. A janitor with no formal title, no clearance, no degree. A man who wasn't part of the plan. And worst of all, a man they trusted more than they trusted her. She waited until the girls had gone outside, the door swinging shut behind a chorus of giggles and the creak of the old screen. Luke stood, wiping his hands on a dish towel, and turned to find Maren standing in the center of the kitchen. He stopped. The space between them thickened. "I need to talk to you," she said. Luke nodded, slowly, sensing it wasn't a conversation, was a decision. She swallowed hard, her jaw tightening. "You've done more than what was asked, and I'm grateful." He said nothing. "But this," she motioned toward the empty breakfast table, the echo of laughter from outside. "This is not sustainable." Luke furrowed his brow. "What isn't?" "The way they look at you, the way they depend on you." "They're healing," he said quietly. "I know," she snapped, then quickly lowered her voice. "I know, but I can't stand in my own home and feel like a guest in my children's lives." Luke's face remained still. "I can't watch my daughter speak your name before she remembers mine." He let the silence stretch. When he spoke, his voice was low. "You think I tried to replace you? I think I let someone else do what I couldn't." Her words were brittle, breaking under the weight of shame. Then she delivered it. "I'm letting you go, Luke." The sentence fell like a stone. He blinked. Once. No protest, no anger, just a slow, steady nod. "If that's what you need." Maren looked at him, startled. "You're not going to fight me on this." "I was never here to fight," he said. "I just listened." She opened her mouth to speak again, but found no words that wouldn't betray her own confusion. Luke folded the towel carefully. "I'll pack my things." He left that afternoon. There was no goodbye speech, no emotional send-off, just a quiet shuffle of bags, a nod to the girl's drawing still taped to the pantry door, and the soft clink of a ceramic mug he'd left, washed and upside down by the sink. But the moment he stepped outside, the air in the house changed, and so did the children. At first they didn't believe it. Maisie thought it was a joke. "But he'll be back, right? He always comes back after dinner." "No, sweetie," Maren said, her voice already cracking. "He's gone." Luna's mouth tightened. "Did he do something wrong?" "No." Locke narrowed her eyes. "Did we do something wrong?" Maren shook her head, but it was too late. The seed of blame had been planted. And then, Lily. Sweet, silent Lily. She walked to the window, placed her hand on the glass, watched the road long after his truck disappeared. And then she said nothing. Not that day. Not the next. Not the one after. Her words vanished again, like birds startled into flight. By Thursday, the house had unraveled. The girls argued more, refused bedtime. Meals were left half-eaten. The sound of laughter no longer filled the rooms, and the tree in the backyard stood over an empty garden. Maren tried. She cooked their favorite meals, brought out old toys. She even attempted one of Luke's bedtime songs, but the girls just stared at her. Each night she lay awake, Lily's silence thundering louder than any scream. On Friday morning, Maren passed the hallway mirror on her way to the kitchen and stopped short. The woman staring back at her wasn't a general. She wasn't a mother either. She was just lost. And finally she whispered to her reflection, "I sent him away because I was afraid, not of him, but of herself, of what it meant that someone else had been what her daughters needed, that her strength couldn't fix what their pain required, that maybe, just maybe, love was less about control and more about staying, even when you're unsure." That evening, Maren opened Lily's bedroom door. Her daughter sat in the window again, rabbit in her lap. Maren crossed the room and knelt beside her. "I made a mistake," she whispered. Lily didn't look at her. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was only protecting myself." Still no response. "I miss him too," she said, and her voice broke. And for the first time in years, Maren wept without restraint. Right there, on the floor of her daughter's room, like a mother, not a soldier, not a commander, but a woman who had finally understood the difference between order and love. The house had never been loud. Even before Luke came, it had been a place of routine, tidy, orderly, precise. But now it was silent in a way that ached, the kind of silence that wasn't just absence of noise. It was the absence of something alive. There were no morning giggles from the hallway, no mismatched socks tossed toward the laundry basket with shrieks of defiance, no footsteps racing down the stairs to smell what Luke might be baking, because there were no bakes, no stories, no origami cranes left on windowsills. The kitchen counter, once cluttered with half-finished coloring pages and apple peels, sat clean. Too clean. The girls' drawings had quietly fallen from the pantry door, the tape losing grip one by one. And Lily didn't go outside anymore. She spent her days curled up on her bed, her arms wrapped tightly around the faded grey mouse that Luke had stitched together from an old dish towel and 2 shirt buttons. He'd said it was not perfect, but it's a survivor. Lily had smiled then, just a little. Now she simply held it like it was the only thing left, tethering her to something she didn't know how to name. Maren noticed the shift. The girls still obeyed her. They said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, ma'am," but with eyes that no longer reached her. They sat through meals, but no one asked for seconds. They listened to her bedtime readings, but they didn't lean in. No laughter, no sighs, no sleepy, just one more page. And worst of all, no Lily's voice. The tiny bud that had begun to open, so fragile and sacred, had closed again. And this time, the petals had sealed tighter than ever before. Maren tried everything. She scheduled a family baking day, but the dough went untouched. She offered a movie night. No one picked a title. She left a deck of cards on the table. The girls passed by it like it wasn't there. There was nothing to argue about anymore, nothing to push against, no chaos to manage. And in that stillness, Maren saw something terrible. They hadn't just lost him. They had lost the part of themselves that believed joy could stay. On the third night, as she wiped down the already clean countertops, Maren found something on the kitchen table. A folded piece of paper, It wasn't addressed, wasn't hidden, just left there like a dropped truth. In the crooked handwriting of a child still learning cursive, the letter read, "Mom, you're a general. You win wars. But do you think you can win our hearts?" Lark. Maureen sat down hard. The chair scraped against the tile. The lights buzzed faintly above her. The quiet pressed in. She read the letter again. Then again. Her hand shook. Because Lark, wild, clever, fiercely loyal Lark, had always been the one who obeyed with a smirk and a wink. The one who tested every line Maureen drew. The one who loved deeply but guarded harder. And now, she had said the most brutal, most honest thing of all. Not to wound, but to wake her mother up. Maureen stayed in the kitchen a long time. The ticking clock, the occasional gust of wind outside, the creak of wood settling, and a thought rising in her chest like smoke from a long doused fire. I sent away the only man who wasn't afraid to sit still long enough to listen. Not to me, but to them. Upstairs, she peeked into each bedroom. Luna was drawing quietly in the dark, sketching the tree out back over and over. Maisie was asleep in a ball, her arms wrapped around a missing shape. Lark stared at the ceiling, eyes wet, expression unreadable. And Lily? Lily lay still, holding the mouse so close her fingers had turned white. Her lips barely moved, and Maureen realized she was mouthing something. Maybe a story Luke once told. Or a lullaby. She didn't interrupt. Instead, she sat in the hallway outside Lily's door, knees pulled to her chest. And for the first time since she had returned from her final deployment, she whispered into the darkness, "I don't know what I'm doing." It wasn't a confession to the children. It wasn't to Luke. It was to herself. To the years she'd tried to command her way through motherhood like it was a battlefield. To the moments she'd mistaken silence for strength, and in the silence that followed, she heard the only thing that truly mattered. She could still choose again. The next morning, Maureen made pancakes. Not perfectly round ones like Luke's. Hers were uneven, a little too dark at the edges. But she left the kitchen messy on purpose, and she placed a clean sheet of paper on the table, a pen beside it. The note was only 2 lines. "You were never just the janitor. If you're still willing, please come home." She didn't sign it. She just folded it, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it on the passenger seat of her car. It was a Saturday morning. Quiet. Still. The kind of morning where even the birds seemed hesitant to interrupt. Maureen stood alone outside the service gate of the county's auxiliary maintenance depot, a squat brick building tucked between the waste sorting facility and an old, cracked baseball field. No one really noticed it. It wasn't the kind of place people came to visit. But she was there, in uniform, hair tied tight, spine straight, and heart, for once, unshielded. She raised her hand and knocked. Once. Then waited. The door opened with a low creak, and Luke stood there in a plain grey t-shirt, smudged with dust and streaked from scrubbing something industrial. His hair was pulled back loosely, eyes unreadable but calm. He didn't flinch when he saw her, didn't look surprised, just wiped his hands on a rag and met her gaze, steady and quiet. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't know if it would mean anything. Instead, she reached into the leather folio tucked under her arm and pulled out a folded paper. Not an official document, not a letter, a drawing. She placed it gently in his hand, palm up like a peace offering. Luke opened it. It was crayon on white printer paper, just slightly wrinkled. The colors were soft, childlike, but intentional. It showed a house. Not a military base, not a castle. A home. There was sunlight spilling through the windows. In the middle of the living room stood a tall man with long brown hair, crouched with a mop in one hand and a ridiculous grin on his face. Around him were 4 girls, laughing, dancing, one even hugging his leg. Above the chimney, a tiny banner waved in blue. "Welcome back, Luke." He stared at it for a long time, then looked up. "Lily drew it," Marin said, her voice rough around the edges. "This morning, without being asked." Luke's thumb brushed lightly over the paper. "She doesn't speak much again," Marin added, "but she drew this, and slid it under my door." Luke's throat worked hard. He didn't speak. Marin exhaled and looked down for a moment before lifting her eyes to his again. "I didn't come to ask you to clean," she said. He waited. "I don't need someone to do chores, or to fix light bulbs, or to keep my reports on schedule." She paused, her voice softened. "I need someone the girls run to without thinking. Someone they argue about who gets to sit next to. Someone they trust. To just be." She took a step closer. "I need someone they call by his first name." Luke held her gaze. His expression didn't change much, but something shifted. A breath deeper. A line in his brow loosened. And in the softest voice, barely more than a whisper, he asked, "Are you sure?" Marin nodded once. "They don't need perfection," she said. "They need you." Back at the house, the windows were open again. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. Lark had found a candle in one of the drawers and insisted it smelled like him. Maisie paced at the window, gripping a walkie-talkie that didn't work anymore. Luna sat by the front door, drawing her own version of the tree in the backyard, with 5 figures beneath it this time. And Lily didn't move from the sofa. She held her mouse in one hand, the other clenching the sleeve of Luke's old work shirt, which Luna had refused to let Marin wash since he'd left. The clock ticked past noon. Maisie was mid-pout when Luna suddenly stood. A slow, steady sound echoed from the porch. Footsteps. Then a knock. 2 soft taps on the glass. Maisie ran first, then Lark, then Luna, and Lily. Silent, frozen, rose, walking like the earth might shake beneath her. When Luke opened the door, 4 girls crashed into him at once. He laughed, a sound so familiar it sent shivers up the walls, and hugged all of them tight. Lily buried her face in his chest and whispered something no one else could hear. He whispered back. Marin stood at the top of the stairs and watched. No salute, no commands, no rank. Just one man holding the world together, with his arms full of children, and no title to his name. Later that evening, after laughter returned like wind through open fields, and dinner was a mess of giggles, spilled juice, and questions shouted over one another, Luke leaned against the porch railing while the girls chased each other across the lawn. Marin joined him. They didn't speak for a long time, until she said, "Do you ever miss the firehouse?" He smiled. "Some days." "And your wife?" she asked softly. "Every day." He turned to her. "But I think maybe she knew I'd end up here." Marin looked at him, surprised. Luke pulled a small, creased letter from his pocket, the one his wife had written before she passed, the one he had read under a yellow porch light not long ago. She wrote, "If you ever find a place that needs you, really needs you, don't just mop the floor. Stay long enough to leave a footprint." Marin's hand found the porch rail beside his. Neither of them moved. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the yard. Inside, the girls' laughter rang out again, and this time it was complete. There was no parade, no balloons, no streamers taped to the banister or signs drawn in glitter marker. Luke's return wasn't loud. It was felt. In the way Luna started humming again at breakfast, in the way Lark began asking questions no one knew the answers to, just so someone would talk, in the way Maisie started sleeping through the night without waking from her half-dreams of things no child should carry, and in Lily, most of all, She didn't run to Luke like before. She walked, steady, deliberate. She stood in front of him one morning, barefoot, hair tangled, eyes soft with something new, and reached out. Not to him, to her mother. Maureen froze. She hadn't expected it, hadn't prepared for it. She'd always prepared for everything, except for this. A small pair of arms around her waist, a warm head pressed to her stomach, and Lily's voice, gentle, almost inaudible, murmuring, "Mommy." Maureen didn't breathe. She just bent down, gathered the little girl into her arms, and held her. No uniform, no strategy, no shields, just skin and bones, just heartbeat to heartbeat. She wept quietly into her daughter's hair. That was the day Maureen learned to stand down, not from duty, but from the invisible armor she'd worn since her husband died. Command had kept her alive, but kindness was finally teaching her how to live again. Luke didn't ask for his job back. He never needed to. He simply hung his coat on the same hook near the laundry room, left a new stack of paper cranes on the windowsill, and went back to baking like he'd never stopped. That Sunday, he slid a tray of warm lemon scones from the oven just as the sun spilled across the countertop. The girls came running like they'd been waiting for the smell their whole lives. No one fought over who got the first one. Maisie simply broke hers in half and gave it to Lily. Luke watched, one hand on his apron string, the other resting on the counter. He didn't speak. And then Lily did. Not loudly, not for attention. Just a whisper, like sharing a secret with the morning. "These are better than before." He smiled, but didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the corner where his old broom had been leaning since the day he arrived. He picked it up, paused, then gently rested it in its spot beside the back door. For good, Marin was outside on the porch. The sky had turned a pale shade of spring blue. She was barefoot on the steps, coffee in hand, hair loose for once. She didn't look like a general today. She looked like someone who had finally laid something down. Luke stepped out beside her. Neither said anything, until she turned to him and asked, "Do you ever miss being the man who walks away?" Luke looked at her, thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said. "It's easier than hoping someone will ask you to stay." Marin nodded. Then, after a long silence, she said, "You don't have to hope anymore." The kids were laughing again inside. Maisie was trying to teach Luna a cartwheel in the hallway. Lark had built a whole zip line from the banister using dental floss and a plastic soldier. And Lily was curled up on the kitchen bench, not with her mouse, but with a book, a real one. She mouthed the words, then whispered them, out loud. One page at a time, Luke walked back in, wiped his hands on a dish towel, then reached for the mixing bowl. He was going to make cookies this time. Marin followed, leaning on the doorframe, watching quietly. She didn't offer to help, didn't ask questions, didn't plan the next 10 steps. She just stood there, smiling. Not because she had won anything, but because for the first time in a very long time, she was home. Final story. Message. Kindness isn't weakness, and some heroes wear aprons, not armor. Sometimes it's not medals or money that hold a family together, but a quiet presence, a gentle voice, and the courage to stay when it's easier to walk away.